It's been a minute. If you're wondering why, turns out not having a stable internet connection for 11 months will do that to a person.
Do not cry for him! Do not cry!
At the end of my last video, What did happen at my last video? Yeah, be prepared to keep waiting. To work my way back into making videos again, I wanted to do something different. Something original. And I landed on talking about a movie for however long this movie... For however long this movie is. I did it again. For however long this video is. A lot has happened in the last couple of years, with a fairly large amount of that time being spent indoors. And people began looking for places to spend all this extra time, whether it be new hobbies,
down, down,
or even our old vices. The particular poison I chose, and seemed to have stuck with me ever since lockdown ended, was movies. I like to think that I was already pretty versed in a lot of films with only a few blind spots left, but nearly 2.5 years later, I can't express how wrong I was.
Jump into it. Let's just jump into it. Let's just jump.
Without any clear direction, I went from different genres, countries,
I just woke up in a fucking steaming mood, yeah?
and too many styles to count.
I threw that shit before I walked in the room!
While I could spend a ton of time covering any one of these movies, well, mostly, I found that many of them fell into a few key pillars, but I want to talk about a few movies that fell into the pillar that impacted me most. These are the pieces of media that you randomly find while scrolling down a streaming service, or haven't heard about but for whatever reason piques your interest, or just comes out of nowhere and clotheslines you. Not only surpassing expectations, but it's something that you'll remember from a very long time even after you finish watching it. It's rare, but when you see it, you know. And this is the reason why I'm making this video. HiGH&LOW is a 7-movie, technically 2-season, 6-movie long franchise. It tells the story of a town run by a powerful gang called Mugen, and after a battle with a duo called the Amamiya brothers, suddenly disappear. The story picks up 5 years later, where a power vacuum has led to 5 different gangs taking over fractions of the city. Using the first initial from each of these gangs, the city is now known as Sword. These factions find themselves constantly vying for power as a new powerful criminal organisation threatens to take over the entire town. That's the basic setup anyway. Now the actual watch order of these movies is probably quite a lot more complicated than it ought to be. It all begins with Road to HiGH&LOW, but not really. The story actually begins with the 2-season long TV show HiGH&LOW The Story of Sword, which sets up the foundation of everything, as well as the numerous characters, and is unfortunately quite difficult to find. The Road to HiGH&LOW is pretty much a recap of the first season of the TV show with a handful of extra scenes, and is designed to lead directly into the first movie. Which is strange because Road ignores season 2 of the show, which, as you can imagine, includes a lot of important information, you know, like the entire backstory of the movie's antagonists. If you can, I strongly recommend watching the show because it sets up the story and characters far better, if you can find it at least. From there it goes the movie, Red Rain, centering around the Amamiya brothers, End of Sky, then Final Mission. Of course, isn't the actual final mission. Then it's DTC, a spin-off which focuses on comedy rather than action, and isn't inherently a bad thing, but the comedic aspects from the other movies aren't exactly too strong. so I'm not exactly clambering for an entire movie of it, following three of arguably the least interesting characters across the series. And with no relevance to the actual overarching story, I just kind of skimmed it. That brings us to the most recent entry, the worst. Not the adjective, but the title. Alright, so for here on out, I'm going to be talking about spoilers. The characters. One of the most striking elements of the series is easily the characters. As I mentioned before, the movies follow 5 gangs. Well, it's technically 11, but stay with me. With each having its own leader and core cast of characters, as well as their own theme. There's a lot, so I'm not going to go over them all in detail, else this video will be far too long. Hoodlum Squad. They're pretty much the main viewpoint of the series and the audience's main introduction to the world. As for the members, there's their leader, Cobra. It's never clarified if this is just a nickname, so I'm just going to assume it's his actual name. Yamato, who is just kind of there a lot of the time. He's good, but he's just kind of there. And Noboru, who is the obligatory tech guy, and to my surprise can actually throw a punch. And take a hit. A lot of hits. Oh, and get ready to see the same flashback a few dozen times. Daruma Ika, whom I have very little to say about, other than their theme song being a banger. In short, they are led by Hyuga and was formed in order to get revenge on Mugen, the gang that Cobra and Yamato was previously a part of. And if you haven't noticed, we're also a fan of lowriders. White Rascals, and according to their wiki page, the all-white wearing scouts are the guardians of the night and protectors of all women in town. So they are literally white knights with a nightclub. Beyond that, their leader, Rocky, gives me very reminiscent vibes of something.
You're gonna be my friend.
And the rest of the gang look like a Discord server decided to try and remake A Clockwork Orange. Rude Boys, which would really be spelt with a Z by the way. Their base of operations is Nameless City, an abandoned industrial facility which now acts as a sanctuary for those with nowhere to go. They are definitely the least morally muddled when it comes to the other gangs. Their leader being Smokey, who grew up in Nameless City and is one of the strongest fighters in the franchise, but unfortunately gets sidelined for the majority of the time because of Rona. With Takeshi and P becoming more synonymous with the face of the group rather than Smokey, which does lead into a pretty satisfying arc, regardless of how intentional it actually was. Oh, and admittedly I did have to use the Wikipedia to actually find out what their names were. Now for easily the best and my personal favourite group, which was saved for last. Oh yeah, high school. This video's definitely gonna get me copyrighted. A school without teachers made up of part-time and full-time students who have been held back multiple years. A school whose hierarchy is dictated by fight clubs and the leader is determined by if they can take 100 punches in a row without going down. Honestly, this group is what it is because of its leader. Followed by his best friends, Furuya and Seki. I consider him to be the best character in the series for a few reasons and by a large margin, with one of the larger reasons being that he has the most complete and well executed arcs across the entire franchise. His loss to Cobra, his encounters with Todoroki, a younger student who's desperate to beat him, who forces Moriyama to reconsider his perspective on what it means to win. Through the series and movies, he goes from a ruthless fighter who only thinks of winning, to realising it doesn't mean anything without others to see it, personally fighting to form the Sword Alliance, taking measures into his own hands to ensure the younger students don't get involved in all the way to choosing to leave Oya High School to the next generation, after recognising he needs to grow up and move on with his life. Yuki Yamada, who plays the character, also has a ton of fun, managing to steal pretty much every scene he's in. There are a few other key groups in the story which I'll quickly race through. The Amamiya brothers, who I previously mentioned, who are incredibly strong and their personal situation forces them into the sword conflict. There is also a contractual amount of slow-mo hero introductions there need to be in each movie. Kohaku and Tsukumo, who initially act as enemies of Sword, who are previous members of Mugen seeking revenge on the Lamora group. The aforementioned Lamora group, part of the larger Koryu group, a criminal organisation planning to take down the 5 gangs and take the city for themselves. Doubt, a drug trafficking organisation who seemingly has a limitless supply of bad guys, who works for the Koryu group as hired guns. There's also the prison gang who serves as antagonists, as well as the Mighty Warriors, but I'm saving them for later. If it's getting a little confusing about now, yeah, I don't blame you. Oh, and there's Chanson as well. A separate foreign criminal organisation also wanted to take control of the city and have like 6 minutes of screen time, with half of it being in a post-credit scene. With that large of a cast, you might think that there'd be too many characters to feasibly handle. And well, you're kinda right. Not many have a proper and traditional development, with the majority of them either being one note or used as jokes to a punchline. One guy gets set off when he hears the word crabs or something. But, in spite of this, I never found that it worked against the series. That might sound dumb, but these characters are perfect for what High and Low is, and what, in my opinion, separates it from so many other movies in the genre. Ridiculous, over-the-top characters that feel and sound more like anime characters than real people. It's not just because they're Japanese, I swear. I say this because it's clear that the creators are well aware of this, and that everything I've previously mentioned is in service to that. The action. Now there are a lot of examples you can look at to describe High and Low's action, which I will be talking about very soon, but the one instance I do want to look at in particular is a fight that probably goes a little unrecognised in the series. The very first brawl. The Hoodlum Squad versus the Scavengers, who never really turn up ever again and only exist in the sequence. Specifically, I'm talking about the version of a fight that appears in the first episode of the TV show, because for some reason the recap movie almost entirely cuts it out. This first fight really sets the tone for the series. It serves as an introduction for the other core members of the Hoodlum Squad and the kind of action to expect going forward. The main characters are put up against seemingly endless amounts of enemies as they move through different areas of a single massive location, with each member having their own fighting style and the rule of cool not just being present but necessary at all times. It manages to strike the fine blend of insanely flashy choreography while still remaining rough enough to feel grounded, at least within its own universe. The camera and editing do amazingly to keep all of the action clear while still remaining frenetic, capturing the raw energy of the situation. Having, from what I can tell, a very impressive one-take sequence spanning across all of the relevant characters. An immediate weakness of mine that instantly won me over. These aspects only improve more and more throughout each entry. But the real reason I'm making this video is because of what happens when you take this premise, and these characters, and this quality of action. I did write an in-depth explanation for this part, but all you need to know for this point is that in short, Kohaku and Tsukumo team up with Chanson, the criminal organisation from earlier, to get revenge on the Lamora group for the murder of their close friend Tatsuya. Throughout most of the runtime of the first movie, Sword is constantly on the back foot. Nameless City is bombed, with the other gang's bases being left in ruins, with Cobra and Yamato being devastated at what Kohaku is doing. Tsukumo even going to them in secret, giving them inside information and asking them to stop him. Each gang being at their limit and no time left before an all-out attack is launched against them by Chanson, they independently of one another decide to launch their own all-out attack, and of course this climaxes in An enormous chaotic brawl sprawling across the entire harbour, featuring all of what I've talked about previously combined. But what makes this sequence what it is how it acts as a playground for the characters. Everything from the sheer scale, the coordination, the energy of the music, and the quantity of heat moves on display. Maybe the best part of this approach is how pretty much every one of the major characters and even some of the minor ones have their moment to shine. Whether it be through their own style of fighting, their personality, or even better, a fighting style that complements their personality. Cobra uses a variety of grapples and throws, similar to how he keeps how he really feels close to him. Rocky, being a weaker fighter, compensates by using his cane as a weapon, which also represents his status as the leader of the White Rascals. Moriyama specialises in taking a lot of hits, but deals even more back, similar to how he became HiGH&LOW's leader in the first place. The Rude Boys all use their free-running abilities that they use to navigate Nameless City and incorporate it into their fighting style. These instances are just a few examples that I could talk. As for the final showdown of the film, it hits the emotional beats it needs to, and the fight, it's good. Sacrificing all of the background music, at least at first, with the only noise left being the sound of the attacks, emphasising the power of each punch, kick or throw. This third act is what I consider to be the initial benchmark of the franchise, which begs the question, what do they do next? Red Rain. We follow the Imamiya brothers, who after the events of the previous movie, have a lead on their older brother who went missing a year ago. And if I'm going to be honest, this movie's a little boring. For a movie approaching 2 hours, not a lot happens. Getting to see more of the brothers is nice, I guess. The action isn't quite up to par compared to the other entries, but my personal highlight is probably the final mansion fight, where the brothers have to use the enemy's weapons against them. My only complaint is that it's way too short, especially since the actual climax, the car and bike chase against the big bad of the movie, isn't amazing. It isn't terrible, but it isn't amazing. End of Sky. Initially I wasn't too sure how I felt about this one, but the more... and the more I see, especially while I've been editing this video, the more it seems to grow on me. One of the biggest highlights being that Kohaku is good now. There are definitely places where the pacing slows down, but more than makes up for it in its strongest sequences. Set pieces like the massive rail yard fight towards the end of the movie. Is it as good as the harbour fight? I still don't know, but it's still great. It switches things up by having a handful of one-on-one fights peppered in between the massive brawls. A standout being Cobra vs Jesse, who pretty much acts as a Virgil character. Each sword gang gets their specific time to shine across the battle. The Mighty Warriors get a sequel introduction to their previous one. However, the best set piece, in my opinion, is the chase for the MacGuffin. Kohaku, Tsukumo, the Imamiya brothers, and this hacker woman who I forgot about but was in Red Rain, get caught in a desperate chase to capture this USB drive containing vital information. Across the chase, the USB is constantly being passed to different characters across different vehicles, all while being pursued by this unstoppable Terminator samurai dude. Oh, and did I mention... Plus, I genuinely have trouble choosing what is my favourite action beat in this set piece. Beyond how the movie meanders, my main complaint about this movie and Final Mission might be seen as a nitpick. It's about how much they nerf the volume of the sound effects in the fights, with even the big punches end up lacking impact despite how the camera attempts to play into them. Rewatching it while making this video, it wasn't as bad as I first thought, but it's definitely noticeable when you go from the series and the previous movie to this one. Final Mission. In one word, underwhelming. When writing this video, I genuinely had to go back to remind myself what exactly happened in the 2-hour runtime. After the great cliffhanger that was End of Sky, it never quite delivers on the war it promises. Don't get me wrong, there's great stuff here. The cold open where we see Cobra, one of the strongest characters, at his most vulnerable, all while the others desperately search for him. Kohaku, Tsukumo and the Imamiya brothers fight through the abandoned building with another seamless one take that pans through multiple floors is actually one of my favourite sequences in the entire series. Unlike the other movies, there isn't a massive brawl in the third act, at least in comparison. And I can understand that, not wanting to deliver something so similar to what the previous movies did. But the problem is they didn't really replace it with anything, despite the action being as solid as ever. Kohaku being probably the best live action Yakuza character we'll ever get. The Mighty Warriors and Prison Gang don't even make an appearance up until the post-credits scene, which I really hope they follow up on sometime. So beside that samurai dude, there's never an equally skilled fighter for the main characters to face. I found this all pretty unfortunate since this was supposed to be the end of an arc that started all the way in season 1 of a TV show. I personally found it so underwhelming that I initially wasn't going to even make this video. Well, until the most recent movie. Put simply, the worst is a culmination of all the strongest parts of High and Low. The solid pacing, what I would say is the peak of High and Low's action, the one takes, the massive brawls, the lighter tone, the enormous set pieces, and of course...
お前が村上か。
村山です。
そんなことはどうだっていいんだよ。
はい。
This is due to centering around Oh Yeah Hi, with the other gangs only get a brief mention every now and then, as well as introducing a bunch of really entertaining new characters. Because of all this, I'd say that this is the most complete feeling movie out of all the franchise, and easily my favourite among all of them. The cool thing being that you don't really need any prior knowledge from the other movies, and can go into this more or less blind, which is why I really recommend watching the movie, and why I'm not really going to spoil anything of the actual plot or set pieces. And is why I've purposely tried to avoid using any of these clips throughout the video. Despite all this critique, in the end I guess the reason I'm making this video boils down to me just liking these movies a lot and wanting them to get more recognition, for all the planning, coordination and skill necessary to achieve what these movies set out to do. How, in a time full of superhero movies with universe-ending stakes, I had more fun watching 7 gangs beat the shit out of each other at a harbour. Now, are these movies for everyone? No. No, they're not. And if I've done my job right, by now you'll know whether or not they are. But in a world where so many blockbuster movies seem to be afraid of appearing silly or constantly undermine themselves with their own jokes, it's refreshing to see
All in.
every actor playing it as exaggerated as possible, impossible moves that you just expected to go along with, and a plot that's all in service of the action which it knows you're here for. Playing everything straight with full sincerity. And at this point, I'm just hoping that they take it even further in the future.
HiGH&LOW the worst. Cross.